I still remember that morning clearly. The sky was pale blue, the kind that usually meant a warm, quiet day on the farm. The fields smelled of damp soil, and the birds perched on the fence posts like they always did, unaware that anything was about to change. My truck was parked by the barn, still muddy from the previous day's work. I'd been up before dawn, fixing the irrigation line behind the north field. I didn't expect anyone to be awake yet, let alone waiting for me near the house. But they were there, all of them. My uncle, my two cousins, even Aunt May in her Sunday dress, though it wasn't Sunday. They stood on the porch like a jury, their faces unreadable. I wiped the sweat and mud from my hands on my jeans and walked toward them slowly, sensing something was off. "We're all meeting inside," my uncle said. His voice carried a weight that made my stomach tighten. Family meetings on this farm had always been rare, and when they happened, they were never about good news. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. The big table was set with stacks of papers. My uncle gestured for me to sit. No one smiled, not even May. I glanced at the documents but didn't understand their purpose yet. I had no idea that in a few hours, the life I'd built here would be split apart like dry timber under an axe. The room felt colder than it should have that morning, even though the sun was streaming through the windows, casting neat golden squares on the floor. I sat at the end of the table, the same place I'd sat for years during family dinners, repairs discussions, or harvest plans. But this time, it wasn't about crops or cattle. It was about ink and paper. My uncle cleared his throat, the sound dry and deliberate, and unfolded a document that had already been read more than once. I recognized the formal heading, Last Will and Testament. My grandfather's name sat at the top like a shadow over everything. For a brief second, I thought it might finally be the moment when promises turned real, when the land would officially be divided the way they'd always told me. I'd worked this farm for years, not for money, but for the future they said we'd build together. Every fence I mended, every field I plowed, every storm I rode out, I did it believing this soil would one day be mine too. But as my uncle began to read, the words didn't match the promises. He spoke slowly, carefully, and the more he read, the tighter my chest became. The will didn't mention my name once, not in the ownership sections, not even in the footnotes. The land, every acre of it, was split between my uncle and my cousins. I felt my hands clench beneath the table. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice breaking the heavy silence. My uncle avoided my eyes. Aunt May looked down at her folded hands. My cousins shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. It was in that moment that the reality set in, not just that I'd been left out, but that they all knew this was coming. The words echoed in my head like the hollow thud of boots on the barn floor. Not mentioned, not once. Years of sweat, blistered hands, frozen mornings and blistering summers, all of it suddenly felt cheap, like I'd been working on borrowed time without knowing it. I looked around the table, searching for even a flicker of remorse, but what I found was silence that cut deeper than any outright betrayal. My uncle cleared his throat again, avoiding my gaze. "You've always been part of this farm," he began, as if softening the blow would make the knife less sharp. "But you were never legally—" I slammed my palm against the table. The sound startled Aunt May, and the coffee in her cup trembled. "Never legally what? Family? Worth mentioning? You made me believe this land was ours, shared, that we were building something together." One of my cousins, the older one, finally spoke. "Look, this was Grandpa's decision. It's not like we wrote the will." His tone was defensive, but there was something else there too. Guilt, maybe, or the uncomfortable knowledge that they had benefited from my blind trust. "You all knew," I said. It wasn't a question. I could see it in their eyes. They'd had time to adjust to this reality. I was the only one standing here with my world flipped upside down. Aunt May whispered, "It's complicated. No, I replied firmly. It's actually pretty simple. You lied. The room went still again. Through the open window, I could hear the wind rustling the wheat fields outside, the same fields I'd worked season after season, believing I was planting my own future. But in truth, I'd been tending to someone else's legacy all along. I couldn't stand the air inside that house any longer. It felt heavy, stale, like it carried the weight of every broken promise that had ever been whispered across that table. So I stood up, without another word, and pushed open the screen door, letting it slap shut behind me. Outside, the sun was higher now, casting sharp light across the fields. The wheat swayed gently in the wind, completely unaware that my life had just split in two. I walked past the porch, down the familiar dirt path that led to the barn. My boots kicked up small clouds of dust with every step. I'd walked this path thousands of times, before dawn, after storms, through summers that seemed endless. It had always felt like home, but that morning, for the first time, it felt like someone else's land. I leaned against the fence near the pasture, looking out at the rows of crops and the distant tree line. Every inch of that view carried a memory. The irrigation pipes I'd fixed with my own hands, the corral I rebuilt after the storm 5 years ago, the old apple tree I'd pruned each spring. I'd poured myself into this place like water into dry soil, expecting it to grow into a future. The barn door creaked behind me. My younger cousin stepped out, hesitating like someone approaching a wounded animal. "We didn't mean for it to happen this way," he said quietly. I didn't turn around. "You all knew," I replied. He sighed, shifting his weight. "Grandpa wanted to keep the land in the bloodline." I laughed bitterly. "Then what was I? Just a worker with the same last name?" He didn't answer. The silence between us said everything. After my cousin walked back toward the house, I stayed by the fence for a long while, staring at the fields like a man trying to memorize a life before it slipped away. The sky was clear now, the sun warm on my back, but inside I felt a cold settling in, the kind that doesn't come from the weather, but from knowing something has ended for good. Eventually, I pushed myself away from the fence and headed toward the old tool shed beside the barn. The shed had always been my space. Its walls were lined with everything I'd used to keep this farm running. Wrenches, saws, shovels, ropes, oil cans, spare parts, even a rusty old radio that only worked when you hit it twice on the side. I opened the door slowly, letting the familiar smell of wood and machine grease wash over me. For a moment, it almost felt like nothing had changed. I grabbed my toolbox from under the workbench. It was heavy, filled with years of collected tools, some bought, some inherited, some built with my own hands. I started packing deliberately, almost ritualistically. Each item I placed inside carried a memory. The hammer I'd used to build the corral after that brutal storm. The old wrench that slipped every time, but somehow never failed me. Even the gloves with holes in the fingertips that I couldn't bring myself to throw away. As the box filled, the reality of what I was doing settled deeper into my bones. I wasn't just packing tools, I was packing up my life here. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying distant laughter from the porch. They were probably already discussing what came next for the land. For me, though, next had just become something entirely different. With my toolbox packed and the shed door swinging gently behind me, I walked slowly toward the edge of the property. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the land itself was holding on to me, unwilling to let me go. I paused by the windmill, the one my grandfather and I had repaired together when I was just a boy. I remembered climbing up those rickety metal rungs, terrified but determined, while he stood below, shouting instructions with that unmistakable mix of pride and impatience. Back then, I thought this land would always be my anchor. I never imagined I'd be leaving it behind like this. The fields stretched out endlessly before me, golden and alive. The wheat moved in waves, catching the sunlight like rippling water. I'd worked these fields in every season, through droughts, floods, and harvests that left my back aching for days. Each patch of soil held a piece of me, my sweat, my time, my trust. I rested my hand on a fence post, feeling the rough wood beneath my fingers. I'd replaced that post 2 summers ago, after a lightning storm split it clean down the middle. At the time, I thought I was preserving my future. The sound of an engine rumbled faintly in the distance. My truck, parked by the barn, like always, waiting for me to climb in after a long day's work. Only this time, there wouldn't be another day. Not here. I turned slowly, taking in the house, the barn, the fields, the hills beyond. I wanted to burn this image into my mind, not out of sentimentality, but because I knew it was the last time I'd see it like this. Mine in spirit, if not on paper. And then, almost reluctantly, I started walking back toward the truck. As I walked back toward the barn, toolbox in hand, I saw them gathered again on the porch. My uncle leaned against the railing, arms crossed, his face set in that same unreadable expression he'd worn all morning. My older cousin stood beside him, pretending to scroll through his phone, while Aunt May sat stiffly in her chair, clutching a handkerchief like it might hold the answers none of them were willing to say out loud. I knew this moment was inevitable. You can't pack up a life quietly when it was built in plain sight. I stopped a few feet from the steps. "So," I began, my voice steady but low. "That's it then. All decided behind closed doors, and I just get to pick up my things and disappear." My uncle sighed. "It's not about shutting you out. It's about what Grandpa wanted." I tightened my grip on the toolbox. Grandpa wanted honesty. At least that's what he preached every Sunday morning at breakfast. If he wanted me gone, why did none of you have the decency to tell me before I gave half my life to this place? My cousin finally looked up. "You could have left any time." I laughed, short and bitter. "Left what? The work I believed was for my future? The fields I kept alive when no one else wanted to get their hands dirty?" Aunt May whispered, "Please, don't make this harder than it already is." I shook my head slowly. "No, May. What's hard is realizing family isn't what I thought it was." The porch fell silent again. A breeze swept across the fields, carrying with it the sound of the windmill turning lazily. It felt like even the land was listening to this final reckoning. I turned away first. Some goodbyes don't need answers. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward the truck. Each step echoed in my mind like the ticking of a clock, counting down to a moment I'd never imagined would come. My toolbox was heavy in my hand, not just with tools, but with the weight of everything I'd built here. The sky had shifted to that pale, blinding light of late morning, and heat began to rise from the dirt road. It was the kind of day that should have been spent fixing fences or checking on the irrigation lines. Instead, I was walking away. I opened the truck door slowly, letting the familiar creak fill the silence. The seat was worn, molded to my shape after years of early mornings and late nights. I set the toolbox on the passenger side, its metal clanking softly against the seat. My hands rested on the steering wheel for a long moment. This truck had been my companion through every storm, every job, every small victory on this land. Now it was about to carry me away from it all. From the porch, I could feel their eyes on me. My uncle didn't move, my cousin stayed frozen, and Aunt May dabbed at her eyes with that same handkerchief. None of them called out. There were no last-minute apologies, no desperate pleas to stay, just quiet acceptance. Or maybe relief. I started the engine. The familiar rumble filled the air, but it sounded different this time, louder, final. I looked once more at the house, the barn, the fields. This place had been my whole world, but now it was just a backdrop to a chapter that was closing. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I knew that once I shifted into gear, There would be no turning back. When the tires finally rolled over the gravel, a cloud of dust rose behind me, like a ghost of everything I was leaving. I didn't look in the rearview mirror at first. I couldn't. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt that cut through miles of open fields and scattered trees. The truck's engine hummed steadily, a sound that usually comforted me after long days, but today it sounded almost unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. After a few miles, I glanced back once. The house was already gone from view, swallowed by the distance and the curve of the land. Just open sky and farmland now. I'd driven this road hundreds of times, usually heading to the feed store or the co-op, sometimes late at night with the windows down and music playing low. But this drive was different. It was quiet. No music, no destination, just movement. The fields on either side blurred as I picked up speed. I rolled down the window and let the wind whip through the cab. The smell of sun-warmed wheat and dust hit me like a wave, familiar, grounding, and yet painfully final. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening. Thoughts swirled in my head. What would I do tomorrow? Next week? For years, my entire identity had been tied to that land, to the work, to the family I thought I could trust. Now, for the first time in my life, there was nothing holding me in place, no obligations, no promises, just open road. It was terrifying, and strangely, beneath the fear, there was a flicker of something else. Freedom, raw, uncertain, but real. The road stretched ahead, waiting. The farther I drove, the more memories seemed to rise up like dust, swirling behind the truck. They came uninvited, snapshots of the life I'd built piece by piece on that farm. I remembered the summer storms, when thunder would roll over the hills, and I'd run out to secure the barn doors before the rain swept in. I remembered the smell of wet soil after those storms, the kind that clung to your boots and stayed under your nails, no matter how hard you scrubbed. I thought about early mornings, when the sky was still dark and the air cold enough to sting. I'd pour a cup of coffee so hot it burned my tongue, throw on my jacket, and head out before anyone else woke. There was a strange kind of peace in those moments, when the only sounds were the crickets fading and the windmill creaking softly. That peace had always made the work feel worth it. Faces came to mind too. My grandfather's rough hands guiding mine as we fixed the tractor belt, my uncle teaching me to check the soil, my cousins laughing during harvest season. Those memories were real, even if the promises attached to them weren't. They were tangled together now, sweet and bitter, like the smell of cut hay on a hot afternoon. The road stretched out endlessly ahead, but my mind was still back there, wandering through fields I'd once called my own. A part of me wanted to turn around, to scream, to demand answers that would never come. But another part of me, the quieter, steadier part, knew that some doors close without fanfare. The wind rushed through the open window, carrying those memories away, scattering them like seeds on uncultivated ground. I let them go, one by one. After what felt like hours of driving, I pulled off onto a narrow dirt path that led down to the river. It was a place I hadn't visited in years, but I'd always known it was there, quiet, tucked between the fields and a line of cottonwood trees. My grandfather used to bring me here when I was a kid. We'd fish on lazy summer evenings, sitting on overturned buckets, talking about the future like it was something we could shape with our hands. Back then, everything seemed simple. I parked the truck under the shade of a tree and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was almost startling. The river moved slowly, shimmering in the late afternoon sun, its surface broken occasionally by the splash of a fish or the drift of a leaf. I sat on the hood of the truck, toolbox beside me, and let the breeze wash over my face. For the first time that day, my chest loosened. I thought about what my grandfather might say if he were standing here now. He'd probably shake his head, call me stubborn, and then tell me to get back up and keep going. He'd remind me that land doesn't make a person whole. Work, heart, and grit do. But he'd also be furious at the betrayal. He believed in legacy, in loyalty, in keeping your word. The truth settled slowly, like silt at the bottom of the river. I couldn't change what they'd done. I couldn't rewrite the will, but I could decide what happened next. This river, this land, these memories, they were part of me, but they didn't have to chain me. As the sun dipped lower, I felt something unexpected. Not just sadness, but clarity, a quiet, steady resolve. I stayed by the river until the sun began to sink, turning the sky into a wash of gold and pale orange. The fields in the distance glowed softly, and the air cooled enough for me to pull my jacket tighter around my shoulders. It was quiet here, no family voices, no arguments, no ghosts of promises broken. Just the steady rhythm of the water moving forward, never backward. I realized then that maybe I needed to do the same. I climbed back into the truck, the seat creaking in that familiar way. The toolbox was still beside me, solid and heavy. It wasn't just a box of tools anymore. It was a reminder of what I still had. Skills, experience, determination. Everything I'd built on that farm hadn't disappeared just because my name wasn't on a piece of paper. Those years shaped me, and no one could take that away. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The river was framed perfectly behind me, calm and unwavering. I wasn't looking back at the farm anymore. I was looking at the reflection of a man who still had something to give, somewhere else. Maybe a new town, maybe a new job, maybe my own land one day, earned by my hands, not inherited through signatures. I pressed the gas pedal gently and pulled back onto the road. The sky deepened into twilight, and the first stars began to appear. For the first time that day, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was moving towards something. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to you, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one.